you, Carmen. Now I would like to introduce our last special speaker for today, Dilip Soman. Dilip Soman is a professor in communication strategy at the Rotman School of Management and director of India Innovation Institute at Rotman and the Munk School of Global Affairs. Professor Soman's research interests include in the area of behavior economics and its application to consumer well-being, marketing, and policy. Professor Soman works with Idea 42 and serves as the advisor to a number of welfare organizations and was recently named as one of the professors to watch for by the Financial Times. Today, Professor Soman will be introducing the topic of behavioral informed innovation and also examine how behavioral informed innovation and the application of behavior economics can impact individuals or societal well-being, and also impact in our daily decision-making processes, and even further to government's policy-making processes. And without further ado, let us now have Professor Soman up to the stage.
Thank you. So Carmen gave you two things to think about. Thing number one was how does this presentation connect to the challenge that you're working on? I'm going to try and answer that question for you before I start. Right? And the answer to that question is, in your challenge, you're going to think about developing a new cook stove, scaling up this whole notion of the system in the Anganwadis where the women develop a system for embedding food with micronutrients, all of that good stuff. And like many innovators, you're going to think, well, this is great. I'm going to go out, I'm going to launch this, and there's going to be lots of people waiting to adopt it. And my warning is that's not going to happen. Right? And the reason it's not going to happen is because of a fundamental issue with consumer behavior, with consumer psychology, and that fundamental issue has to do with why consumers don't buy when we think that they should. So that's going to be the theme that I'm going to tackle today. I'm going to start off by talking about this notion of behaviorally informed innovation. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about a style of innovation that's popular in India and many parts of the global south. It's a style of innovation called Jugaad, and I'll talk a little bit about what that is. And I'll end with a few prescriptions in terms of what you should do or what any innovator should do to make innovation successful in the global south. So that's a brief synopsis of what I'm going to do. I'm going to start off by also thanking all of you for being here. This is easily sort of the best event in the year for me. It's a great program, and so Caitlin and Carmen and Nandita and Beverly, thank you for reducing the volume. Is that what you mean? All right. Here's the story. Let me start off by showing you the picture of an extremely grim-looking person. I don't know if you know who this guy is. He is an American author. He's called Ralph Waldo Emerson. He wrote lots of things. He said lots of things. But amongst the things that he said that has become the most popular is that following statement. He said, build a better mousetrap, and the world will beat a path to your door. And so essentially what he was saying was that as long as you have a product that delivers something meaningful, something superior over existing options, then in fact all you have to do is sell it and people will buy it, right? And it turns out that he could not have been wronger in terms of that particular assertion. So if you start looking at data, right, there's a lot of entities like the American Marketing Association that collect data on new product successes. Here's what they find, right? They find that depending on how you account for them, anywhere between 90 to 99% of new products fail. Right? And failure could be something as dramatic as they never make it to the stores, or if they do, then they get off the shelves in the first 6 months. Right? And so the idea is, why is it that so many new products that are presumably developed by innovators that have thought a lot about what adds value and what doesn't, why do so many of them fail? And that's what I want to talk about for the first 15 minutes or so of today's session. So here's some examples. Right? These are all examples from the global north. These are not things you'll find in India, with the exception of the bottom right. But the Segway, the electric car, I don't know if anyone of you know what that vehicle there is. It's the Tata Nano. The Tata Nano is a car that was developed by the Tata Motor Company in India. You can buy it for $6,000 US. like it's the full car, right? It's an interesting vehicle. It is built for the upper to lower middle class in India, for urban India. These are families that have an income that doesn't let them buy a regular car. They typically travel on scooters and motorcycles, and so this is supposed to be a safer option to traveling on a scooter or motorcycle. It's a small vehicle. It barely seats 4. It turns out that because the windscreen is so small, you just need one wiper because there's no room for 2, so you save on that. Indian families, it turns out, like to hold on to their possessions, so we don't need a boot, and so we save some room there. Traffic in urban India moves so slowly that even if you get into an accident, nothing really happens, so we don't need airbags, so we get rid of those. And by the time you know it, you've lost half the components of a standard car, and you've got the Tata Nano, which sells for $6,000 to $7,000 US. It was supposed to be the solution to a lot of urban commuting problems. Turns out it's a spectacular disaster. And then on the bottom right is a product that was launched by the Indian Railways. It's called the Garib Rath. The Garib Rath stands for the chariot for the poor. And what it was a way in which they innovated with the coach design and layout so that the average consumer in India who cannot afford to travel in an air-conditioned train could now do so, right? Now, the problem with that particular Garib Rath was not the fact that it was a lovely innovation, but nobody wanted to be seen getting off the chariot for the poor, right? So on one hand, you're trying to develop an innovation to help the poor people assimilate and consume things that they otherwise could not afford, but by labeling it the Garib Rath, you squash any aspirational value that you have for that particular product. And so what's common to a lot of these examples is the idea that the technology was fine, there was a lot of potential market demand, the innovators had spent a lot of time and energy in developing the ideas, they had done some market testing, but in fact the products all failed at what I'm going to call the last kilometer, right? And the last kilometer is the point of time when the consumer finally comes in contact with your product. So the argument I'm going to make is that oftentimes innovators fall into a trap that I'm going to call the last kilometer problem. I'll talk about what that is in a minute. And then towards the end, I'll talk a little bit about the prescription for how to get over the last kilometer problem. So what is the last kilometer problem? Right? Some people south of the border call this the last mile problem. But this is what it is, right? So imagine that you're driving from point A to point B, right? Let's say I had dinner with a friend of mine last night. He lives in Oakville. He works downtown. What he does is he takes the gardener to come downtown first thing in the morning, 7 a.m., and it takes him precisely 20 minutes to get from Oakville, where he lives, to the base of Spadina on the Gardner Expressway. And then it takes him 40 minutes to get from there to his office, which is just like 3 kilometers away. Okay? So that's the last mile problem, right? It's a problem that is common to transportation, to lots of engineering situations. The idea that when you want to get something from point A to point B, most of the commute is easy, it is smooth, but when you get to the end, that's when it really takes you cost and effort. Think about computer networks, right? Connecting a computer network from city 1 to city 2 is easy, you just require one cable, but once you get to the other city, now you need hundreds of little cables going to everybody's homes, that's expensive. That again is an example of the last mile problem, right? So the last mile problem or the last kilometer problem says that as a society, in the domain of innovation, as a society, we spend way too much time and energy and cost thinking about developing products. We don't spend as much time thinking about how consumers are going to adopt them at the end. And I'm going to push you to do that, right? I'm going to push you to do that because benefits of a product that might seem superior to you may not seem superior to the end user, all right? Simple example, think about a cook stove. Right? One of the big benefits of a clean cook stove is the fact that it doesn't produce as many fumes, and so it is safer. You don't have carbon monoxide inhalation, that sort of stuff, right? To you, that's a no-brainer, right? I mean, obviously, anybody you think would want a cook stove where they inhale less smoke. Wrong, right? The average rural Indian household is run by a woman who believes that the more pain she incurs in cooking food for her family, the better off the food is, and the happier her family will be. And she has played a more important role in making sure that that family has received the most nutritious food. So part of it is that, right? Unless the kitchen is smoky, the food cannot be good. That's a belief, right? And that's the kind of belief you need to understand, right? Because if you went in and said, well, gee, you know what? Here's a cook stove that will get rid of all of the smoke in your kitchen. Nah, food can't be tasty, right? And so there's lots of such examples where you have beliefs in the field, where you have ways of thinking that run counter to the prevailing wisdom. And so one of the things I'll caution you is when you think about your products and your innovation, try and avoid using an us versus them approach to thinking about the innovation, right? Just because you can see that the innovation is a no-brainer success doesn't mean the consumer is going to see that, right? And I'll give you some more examples of that problem. Here's an example from sort of the Western world, okay? Organ donation. Okay? Obviously, this is a big issue in many countries. We want to get as many people to donate their organs because last year, for example, in this country, about 750 people died waiting for a kidney transplant. So these are lives that could have been saved had we had enough kidneys in the system. And here's a piece of data that I want to try and explain to you. This is data from a bunch of different European countries. The height of the bars represent the implicit organ donation rates as a function of those countries, right? Now, I'm sure all of you have taken a class in stats at some point in time, right? And statistics will tell you that if you look at any piece of data, it's got to look normal, bell-curved, right? You probably have some countries with really high organ donation rates, some with really low, but the bulk of them should be in the middle, around 40 to 60. That doesn't happen here. It's a very odd pattern, right? You've either got countries that have extremely high organ donation rates, 98, 99, 99.9, or you've got a bunch that have got extremely low organ donation rates, right? And you look at this data and you say, well, what's going on? What's the difference between the countries in the gold bars and the countries in the blue bars? A bunch of researchers at Columbia tried to do that. Their first hypothesis was the countries in the blue obviously spend more per capita on their organ donation programs. That wasn't the case. The countries in blue probably have better communication strategies, and that wasn't the case. And they went through the obvious things. Nothing seemed to explain the data, right? Here's what explains it, okay? If you try and donate organs in this country, here's what you've got to do. You've got to go to the Department of Motor Vehicles. You ask them for a form, right? If the guy at the counter knows where the form is, they will give you one. It comes in 3 parts. You fill up all 3. You keep one. They keep one. The third one gets put in the mail. It goes to some undisclosed location in Quebec. After about 2 weeks, you get a letter in the mail with a code. You go online. You enter the code, and then you become a registered organ donor. That's our system, right? Guess what happens in France? In France, it is assumed that you will donate your organs. But if you want to not donate your organs, what do? You go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, you get a form, it comes in 3 parts, you fill one, you keep one, same story, right? All you have done is you have changed the default, okay? In France, it is assumed that you will donate organs. In Canada, it is assumed that you will not donate organs. The process remains the same, right? But by simply changing the defaults, you get dramatic differences in organ donation rates. Right? Now, it turns out this is not the only example. You can think about in which defaults actually change the way in which consumers think about products, right? Everybody's got a smartphone, right? So some of your teachers will remember the days in which we had no smartphones, right? There was a company in Waterloo, which was, I guess it's still called Research in Motion. They were the first company to actually invent the smartphone. They came up with something called a BlackBerry. I remember my first BlackBerry. It was heavy. It hung from my belt. My son still makes fun of me for keeping the old one. But when they first came up with the concept of a smartphone, they did a concept test. The way the concept test works is you gather a bunch of people, in their case about 5,000 consumers. They described the concept of the BlackBerry. They said, would you think about a device that integrates your email and your phone and your calendar and whatever else? It hangs on your bed. You can take it with you. Would you buy this thing, right? Guess what the response rate was? It was like 0.1% said yes. I mean, who would want this thing? Right? You've never had this gadget before. Nobody sees the benefit of it. RIM smartened up. They changed the way they did market research. What they did was they came up with a prototype. They hired 5,000 people. They endowed them with a BlackBerry. They said, keep this with you for 3 months. Right? And then at the end of the 3 months, they basically asked a slightly different question, which was, would you now please give me your BlackBerry back or pay X dollars to keep it? And suddenly 90% of people were willing to keep it. Right? Lots of examples. Right? When I first moved to this country, I got a call from Rogers for cable TV. Would you pay $500 or whatever? I forget what it was. Right? A year for all of these channels. I said no. Then they started giving me free cable TV for a month. And at the end of the month, I woke up, and the only thing I could see was CBC News. I called them back. I got my cable back. Right? Changed the default, and people's valuation of the product changes. And this is a big, interesting finding. Right? These are not human beings who clearly know what they want. The way in which you present information to them changes what they actually want. So here's the idea. Most of us, when we think about the world of business, are in what I'm going to call an econ mindset. We think human beings are rational. We think consumers know what they want. Right? The assumption is that consumers are rational. What is rationality? They can value things. They know how to compute things. They know whether it's worth paying $100 for a given product or not. They are forward-looking. They can anticipate what they're going to feel and do in the future. They maximize self-interest. They are utilitarian. They are unemotional. Real people are not like that. Right? This is what your econ textbook tells you about human beings. Right? Wrong. Right? Real people don't do that. Right? Real people are, sometimes do stupid things. They fall in love. They watch movies. They go on roller coasters. I mean, no econs would go on roller coasters. It doesn't make sense. Right? Why would you scare yourself when you know that fear is a negative emotion? It's just like, it doesn't make sense, right? But real people are not like that. Real people are a lot more like this, right? Now, if you actually think about this picture, right? Why are these people taking the escalator to go to the gym? Right? Now, you could actually come up with some, when I show this picture to my economist friends, they say, yeah, you know what, they're going to work out, they want to conserve energy. I actually don't think that's true. Right? I actually think that they're not thinking at all. Right? If you put an escalator in front of people, they'll step onto it. If you put stairs, they'll step onto that. Right? And so the idea is fun. It's simple, right? If you want people to engage in a certain course of action, it could be anything. Make it fun and make it simple. Right? That's a basic principle that underlies all behavioral change approaches, as behavioral economics will tell you. If you make it fun and you make it simple, people will do whatever it is you want them to do, right? So here's an example. Okay, coffee. All right, three sizes of coffee. Which one do you think is the most popular? Medium. Why? Not too big. Goldilocks. That's called the Goldilocks principle, right? So here's a simple experiment we did a number of years back when I lived in Hong Kong. We worked with this coffee shop. We sort of kind of hung out and observed what people were buying. 72%, I believe, bought the medium size of coffee. We asked them why. They said exactly what you said, right? Not too big, not too small, all right? Then after about 3 weeks, we did something slightly sneaky, okay? This picture, this was 10 ounces, 12 ounces, and 14 ounces. We added 2 ounces to each size. And lo and behold, the new medium became the most popular size. We asked people why, and they said it's not too much, not too little, just right. Right? And we subtracted 2 ounces from both, and we got the same story. Right? So the point is, it's not like people know how much coffee they want or that they should drink. They choose the one in the middle because it is in the middle. Right? The idea is people construct preferences from the context. Right? Now, I know this works. Like, the one hallmark when you guys come to university, you realize that professors are extremely wishy-washy, right? So you ask us, well, will this work? And they say, yeah, it kind of depends. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. This one, I give you a guarantee. Right? I'll give you the guarantee because I was fooled by it myself, and I studied this stuff. Right? So here's an example. Right? Young and Eglinton. Right? This is kind of just just west of Yonge and Eglinton. Petro-Canada, I took this picture one fine day because I've been buying gas at this gas station for years and years and years. And this day I stopped and noticed that they were selling 94 octane gas. Right? Now, I'm actually an engineer in my previous life. I used to design these engines. And I knew from back then that there is no car engine that's been designed that actually needs 94 octane fuel. Right? But that was like 20 years back, so I figured I'd call up one of my colleagues. So I did that. I checked with them. They confirmed that, in fact, no car actually needs 94 octane fuel. The question is, why is Petro-Canada selling something that nobody needs? All right. Answer number one, because maybe there's some stupid people out there who don't know that they don't need it, so they buy it. Right? But it turns out that that's not the obvious answer. Right? The obvious, like if you look at the data, nobody actually buys 94 octane petrol. Right? But what happens is once you launch 94 octane, the sales of 91 went up. It's now in the middle. Right? You see that light there? That was me. Okay? Like without looking, like I didn't even think. I just kind of did that, right? I ended up picking 91. I've been buying 89 all this while, right? But now that there was 94, 91 was in the middle. You construct preferences, right? So the idea again is that this is evidence to show that people really don't know what they want. It's surprisingly malleable how much you can change and influence their preferences simply by changing what you give them. Mark Twain, everybody's read this story, right? Tom Sawyer, all right? No, nobody's read this? You haven't read this? You should, okay? Here's the 2-minute version, all right? Tom plays hooky from school. He's punished, and his punishment is to paint a fence on a hot day, all right? So Tom is kind of painting the fence. He's got like perspiration flowing down his face. He's thinking, what am I going to do to get out of this, right? So he has this brilliant idea. He sees his friend, I forget the name, Spike, let's call him Spike, right? Spike is walking by, and so Tom starts singing. Just painting the fence, like, humming away, as if he's having the time of his life. Spike stops and says, what are you doing? And Tom says, I'm having a great time. And Spike says, really? And Tom says, yes, right? So Spike kind of hangs out, he kind of, watches Tom painting the fence, he's singing away. Spike says, could I try? Tom says, no, it's way too much fun, right? So this happens for the next 2 or 3 minutes. Finally, Spike tries again. He says, I really want to try this thing, right? So Tom looks at Spike triumphantly. He smiles. He says, well, sure, you can try, as long as you pay me a quid. Okay, so Spike pays him a quid, starts painting the fence. Tom sits by, watches Spike. Spike quickly realizes that this is no fun, right? It's hot, his perspiration flowing down. Then somebody else walks by and tells Spike, asks Spike, what are you doing? Now, Spike has just paid a quid to do this thing, right? He's not going to say, I got suckered into doing something that I shouldn't be doing, so he says, I'm having a great time, right? And so pretty quickly, everybody is painting the fence for Tom. Tom is 6 quid richer, and he's got other people doing work for them, right? Now, there is a modern-day version of this story, right? It's a company called IKEA. That's what they do, right? They lead you into believing that it's so much fun to assemble furniture. You take the damn thing home. All right. Let me give you a couple more examples, right? So the notion of changing the default is what we call the opt-in versus opt-out strategy. So we talked about organ donation. Let me tell you an example, which is bullet point number 3, medical checkups. Do you know what % of people in this country get annual medical checkups? Can you guess? Wishful thinking. 24, right? 24% get annual medical checkups. There is a lot of evidence suggesting that if you bump that number from 24 to 48, our preventive healthcare costs would actually, basically, you would cut down significantly on your healthcare costs because your preventive health costs would go up, but your reactive health costs would go down. So it is in everybody's interest that people go in and get their annual checkups. Why do people not get their annual checkups done? Because it's a bit of a pain. right? You've got to call your doctor's office, they've got to schedule an appointment. It's not that complicated, but it's just one more thing to do, right? So we did a study. And what we did in the study was we took a sample of people, we called them, and we randomly assigned them an appointment. All right, Mr. Church, September the 20th, 10 a.m. If you can't make it, please give us a call. Everybody magically showed up. Right? They just want to avoid calling. Right? If you think about it, right? Like, you know, in organizations, calling your HR department is the worst thing, right? Like, nobody wants to call HR. So if you want people to save more money, for example, right? You tell them, I'm going to deposit 10% of your salary into a savings account. Should you want to change that number, please call HR. Nobody wants to call HR. So they all save 10%. Right? So the point is, if you just add in a small obstacle, people desist from whatever behavior you don't want them to engage in, right? So if you want people to do something, make it easy. If you want them to not do something, just add a little intervention, a little cost. All right? Okay, let me just talk about a couple more things. I will then move on and try to converge. Let me talk about something called the yes, damn effect. Okay? Another classic example of human behavior. Okay? What is the yes time effect? So here's how I'm going to explain it, right? Carmen, who's vanished now, asked me several months ago, would you come in and speak to the GII on March the 4th? I said yes. Right? It was next semester. In fact, it was actually next year. Right? It was next year. I thought I'm going to have all the time in my life. And this morning when I woke up, I looked at my calendar. There were like 16 different meetings. I said, damn, why did I say yes? Right? Now, if you haven't experienced yes, damn, you're not a human being. All of us do it. Right? Think about exercise machines. Like everybody buys these ellipticals and treadmills. They sit in your basement. For the first month, you're there every single day. Second month, other things become important. If you're like me, I just went down to my basement. I was like, look, there's an elliptical there. And my wife was like, yes, we bought that 7 years ago. But that happens, right? Because people anticipate that they're going to be rational in the future when in fact they're not. All right? Now, this is interesting because it opens up the market for what I'm going to call self-control devices. Okay, so here's the idea. All of us want to lose weight, save more money, eat fruits and vegetables instead of cake, study, whatever else, right? All of the good stuff. But tomorrow, not today. Right? Because today is special. All right? And of course, when you get to tomorrow, then that shifts by one more day. And so the trick is, if you can get people to commit to doing something good tomorrow, and then figure out some way of locking them into that commitment, you can get them to do all kinds of things. Right? So Save More Tomorrow is a plan which actually employs a simple behavioral idea. You tell people, don't you think you should save more money? And they say yes. Well, why don't you save more money? Oh, because I've got expenses. Would you save more tomorrow? Yes. Okay? So you come up with a plan where people commit to saving 10% of any salary increases that they earn in the future. It's in the future. So everybody says yes. Right? Then you come up with a way in which they forget about that commitment. Right? How do you forget? You basically have them sign a document, and they only see 90% of the salary increase. And most people never check the bank balance and see that the check that they're getting is actually exactly the same as what HR said they were going to get. There's always other deductions, right? So people forget, right? And so by doing the Save More Tomorrow strategy, it turns out in a bunch of different organizations in the United States and Canada, we were able to increase savings rates by about 20 to 25%. Just by fooling people. Well, fooling is not the right word, right? Just by getting people to commit to doing something in the future and then putting in a lock on their mechanism. Here's a slightly more fun example, right? And this one comes from Google. Now, all of us have sent email that you wish you hadn't sent. You've done this, right? Everybody's done it. Okay? There's something magical about the enter button on the keyboard. Right? You can stare at an email for as long as you want. It looks perfect. hour, 2 hours, 5 hours, right? It's only when you hit the enter button that you go, damn, I shouldn't have sent that, right? Now, it turns out that the folks at Google realize that this is the case. It is especially true for undergrad students, in particular undergrad students on Friday nights when they are off at the bar, got a couple of extra drinks, and you email your prof and say, that was the worst class I've ever had, or whatever else, right? Things that are not good to do. And so what Google can do is they can put a lock on your email, right? So you tell Google, I plan to be drunk on Friday night. Well, that's not slightly more elaborate way of doing that. But I plan to be drunk on Friday night. And when I'm drunk, I really can't do my math well. Okay? So Google knows you're going to be drunk on Friday night between 8 p.m. and whatever it is. If you try and send an email in that period of time, it's going to make you do these 5 math problems. Right? And unless you get all of them in a minute, it will not send you an email. All right? Now, if you happen to be the kind of person who's really good at math after a couple of drinks, there are some people like that, you can have it give you different problems. Right? It can give you logic problems or Sudoku puzzles or whatever else, right? So by default, Mail Goggles is only active late nights on the weekends, as that is the time you're most likely to need it. All right? But if you plan to be drunk on Thursday morning, you can tell Google that. Yeah. Right? So that's a self-control device. All right? Okay. So this was the fun stuff, right? So I hope I've convinced you that people really are clueless about what they want. All right? We have this vision of consumers knowing what they want. It's not clear to me that that's a very good vision. So why do consumers not buy? Right? Why do consumers not buy these innovations? There's a bunch of reasons. One is when you think about switching from an existing product to an innovation, right? So let's say switching from cooking on charcoal to cooking on a clean cook stove, you've got to give up something and you get something in exchange. All right? And it turns out that you've got lots of research showing that people overvalue losses as compared to gains. Right? The pain you feel from losing $10 is way stronger than the happiness you get if you find $10. Right? People hate losses. All right? And so that essentially says that unless your loss, and in fact there's a magic ratio which is 2.5, right? So you need to have a gain which is at least 2.5 times the size of the loss for them to be even comparable. Right? And as a result, unless your product offers truly spectacular gains, nobody's going to switch. Right? Think about the electric car. Right? What's the loss? When you switch away from a petrol car to an electric car, you lose convenience. Right? Think about the mental model. Right? What's my mental model when I drive? I drive around and I drive around till that little dial on my dashboard goes to the last quarter. That's when I start looking for a gas station. There are lots of gas stations all over the place. I find the closest one, I refill, off I go. I don't need to plan, right? But if I have an electric car, I need to plug the damn thing in every morning. Okay? It fundamentally changes the way you drive. It's a big behavior change, right? When you think about the loss that people experienced in terms of that habit, that was huge compared to the benefits of the electric car, right? What are the benefits of an electric car? Well, it cuts down on your energy bills. But a lot of people don't notice that because you pay everything on a credit card anyways, right? Plus, there are gains to society because the air is cleaner, and you know what? Who cares? That's the honest truth. Like, who cares, right? And so you've got to make the gains truly spectacular compared to the losses, right? And the last bullet point, which is there is a fundamental mismatch between the innovator's point of view and the adopter's point of view. Right? When you think about the innovator, they've been working with this product for 5 years, 10 years, in some cases even longer. They understand the product, they believe in it, the consumer is seeing it for the very first time, right? And so there's just a completely different worldview of the same exact product, all right? Now, let me say a couple of things, and then I will shut up eventually, okay? So, behavior change, right? So if I've got an innovation, I want to get people to adopt it, which is engineer a behavior change. How do I do it, right? 4 different ways of getting people to adopt products. Way number 1, starting at the top, incentive, right? Give them some financial incentive, right? Give them a discount or tax the thing that you don't want them to consume. But economics is great. I mean, marketers do this all the time, right? New product, 50% off, free trial, that sort of stuff, right? That's one. The second one is restriction, right? Make it difficult for them to obtain the other product. Now, we can't do that if you're an innovator, but if you're a government and you want to change people's behavior, you can just ban certain things, right? You can impose other forms of constraint. You can make certain activities illegal, right? But that's one way of doing it. You can persuade people, right? So you can convince them. You can spend lots of money advertising, trying to convince them why the electric car is something that they want to do. Or finally, you can nudge them, right? What is nudging? That's nudging, right? Trying to change behavior without economic changes, without persuasion. Right? How do I do that? I put my product in the middle. I surround it by a more expensive product and a cheaper product, right? Or I change the default. Okay? So those are 4 broad approaches to changing behavior. Interesting kind of framework to keep in mind as you start thinking about how you want to get your target market to start engaging with your product. Okay? Now, let me just talk about Jugaad very, very briefly. And then I'll start wrapping up. Jugaad. So this is a new word for you, right? It's a word that's derived from a Hindi word. Jugaad is one of those particularly impossible to translate words, but it essentially stands for a form of innovation where you make do with the resources that you have and somehow put them together to make it work for you, right? So let me give you some examples, right? So the top right, okay? This actually featured in a Bollywood film. And it was kind of interesting. What it is basically a vendor in Punjab who uses a washing machine to make lassi. Amazing, right? Right? This guy, lassi is like churned buttermilk, right? This guy can, he can produce lassi in like 10 minutes to feed an entire army, right? But that's an example of Jugaad, right? He's got a resource. He doesn't know what to do with it. He's got the basic idea that it churns things. He puts the milk in there, off you go. You've got lassi, right? That's an example of Jugaad. Here's another example, which actually comes from Africa. It's a product called the Raspberry Pi. Has anyone heard of this? Right? If you think about a computer, right? Half the cost of a computer and half the size of a computer is attributable to the display device, a screen. Right? And this inventor said, well, you know what? All of us have screens all over the place. You go home, you have a TV, you have a monitor, which is kind of sitting around. Even your cell phone has a screen, right? So all he did was he said, I'm going to produce a computer that has no screen, but you can just connect it to any screen, right? So it's a simple Raspberry device. It's a Raspberry Pi. It's the basic heart of a computer. You can stick on any display device on the top, and it cuts the cost by half. It's Jugaad. Right? What you've done there is you've used the resources in the environment to cut down on the cost and the complexity of a product. Right? There's a bunch of others which I won't get into. Actually, let me talk about this one. On the left-hand side, you've got an oven. Right? This is the new Zipwell oven from Zenith. It cost like $4,000 for that price. You can control the temperature as precisely as you want to. You can talk to the oven, it'll talk back to you. It's a funky thing, right? $4,000. This one is what you'll find in India, right? It's an oven made from earthen clay. Does the same exact thing as the one on the left with a little bit less control, right? But it costs the equivalent of $7 US. Amazing, right? Clay is all over the place. Clay has insulation properties. And so this is Jugaad. You've essentially used a resource that is available in abundance in the environment to actually satisfy the end outcome, right? Another one, this is a fridge, also made from clay. It's called Mitti Cool. This is actually an innovator who was here at U of T and worked with one of our professors. All right. Prescriptions. Okay, so I've hopefully convinced you that people are messed up. As an innovator, it's going to, never ask people questions, by the way, right? Never ask, buyers are liars, right? And they're liars because they truly don't know what they want. Okay, so simple example. If you stop at a bank and ask people, were you satisfied with your experience today? Most people say yes, unless it's like a really bad bank, right? If you ask them a slightly different question, were you dissatisfied with your experience today? Most people say yes, right? Why? Well, there's two reasons. Reason number one is that most experiences are inherently ambiguous. If you ask me if I was satisfied, I will look for reasons to be satisfied. Got my check cleared, Teller smiled at me, satisfied, right? If I look for reasons to be dissatisfied, I will find reasons to be dissatisfied. Blemish on the carpet, right? Queue was long, there was no sign, right? So that's one reason, right? The other reason is that every time you ask people a yes/no question, they always say yes. In general, they do that because they like to be agreeable, but also because we often tell them to say yes, right? You've often filled out forms, like feedback forms, right? Question number 1, were you happy? Yes, no. If yes, go to question 10. If no, please answer questions 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So who in the right mind is going to say no, right? So be careful, right? So I'm going to push you to articulate what I'm going to call the value proposition, okay? And I think Caitlin is going to have a little handout for you that looks like this. It's an old handout, but it gives you a format for thinking about a value proposition statement, right? What's a value prop statement? It is a statement for your innovation written in consumer language as to why you think a consumer should care. Not why you care, but why you think they should care. Not in your words, but in their words, right? It focuses on benefits, not on attributes. Consumers don't care about the size of your oven, about the incandescent level. They care about convenience. They care about cost. They care about keeping their family happy. It talks about who you are, what is your product, why you are, claiming to deliver the benefits that you are, and why you will win. Why is your product better than existing solutions? And then finally, it's aspirational. You want to create a value proposition that people actually want to own this product, right? You don't want to say, well, travel in my train because it is a chariot for the poor. That is not aspirational. People don't want that, right? So there's lots of examples of poor aspiration statements, but take a look at that, right? Choice architecture. All of the stuff we talked about, putting the product in the middle, changing the default, is what we're going to call choice architecture, right? You can change the context in which a choice is made to nudge people towards your desired option, right? So think about free trials. Think about changing the default. Think about creating multiple options, right? And these are different tools you can use. We talked about defaults, the way in which choices are presented, how information is framed, right? The idea that losses hurt you more than gains make you happy. Credit card surcharges, 3%, right? So if you pay by a credit card, you will pay 3% more. People hate that. If you pay by cash, you will pay 3% less. People love that. It's the same piece of information, right? You've just changed it from a loss to a gain. Has a big effect, so that's what we call framing of information. So that's prescription number 2. Prescription number 3, big one, right? Remember that your key goal when you innovate is not to just sell, but to get people to use the damn thing. If people don't use it, they won't recommend it. There's no word of mouth. There is no learning, and there is no repeat purchasing, right? So focus on consumption and not just on sales. Integrate the innovation into existing ecosystems. This kind of sounds like a very complicated thing, but essentially what it says is try and create an innovation consumption pattern where people don't have to change habits in any dramatic ways, right? So like the electric car example, if I've got to change the way in which I refuel my car, it's a fundamental change, right? And people don't really like that. See if you can reduce those basic changes in behavioral patterns. And then finally, this is not something that will be applicable to your projects, but in general, when you're done with this, you set up your own companies, always think about developing innovation bottom up, start at the field, right? A lot of innovations in the Western world start in a lab. Somebody's sitting there and thinking, wouldn't it be kind of cool if we had a car that spoke to you and knew your name and could, give you motivational messages? I mean, yeah, right? But if you start in the lab, you lose the connection with reality, right? And so always start bottom up, start in the field, observe people, hang out. The best kind of market research you can do is people watching, right? So those of you who are Starbucks fans, you know exactly what I mean. So you can hang out there, watch people, overhear them. But at the end of the day, it's all about making sure that the benefit that you come up with your innovation is a meaningful benefit to the consumer. Okay? I will shut up. Turn it to you, Nandita. Thanks. Faculty, you guys can decide what to do with it. Keep it under your pillow or put it in the library or whatever else, right? But what it is basically a collection of essays by all of the faculty that you pretty much see in this program, right? And it's about frugal innovation, thinking about scaling innovations and issues along the lines of poverty as well. So hopefully you enjoy that. If you have any comments or questions, let us know first. All right, now questions about today. Yep. Yes.
How do you say by changing the default? By changing the default, you can manipulate people's behaviors.
Yes.
But for our topic, we're talking about people who are really full, that they have child malnutrition going on. So do you think that changing the default is still apply to their behavior?
Okay, so I think a quick response. The question is, does it really matter in terms of whether people are poor or not, or are there cultural differences? Like, is the default story a true story? Is it a law, right? And the answer is that with social sciences, it's always kind of hard to say that anything is a law. But in the world of social sciences, the default is kind of like the law of gravity. It generally works, right? And it generally works because whether people are rich or poor, or global north or global south, or American or Asian or whatever else, everybody is inherently lazy. We know that, right? And I don't mean lazy from like a slothful lazy kind of way, but people just don't like to do things that they don't have to do. So if you endow them with something, they naturally presume that that's the default, right? So the short answer is, yeah, it's true. The same default law will work, right? But the trick is how you figure out how to change the default. And that's not something that I can answer right now. Yeah?
So one of the things that I'm talking is the superstitious or the social default of women working.
Yes.
Is a big obstacle. So how do you change the perception, cultural perception that is very rooted in history about women working?
Okay, so I'm going to answer the question by answering a different question, right? Just to give you sort of a guideline how to think about it. So here's a simple behavioral observation, right? All of you go to Loblaws or Longbows, right? When you walk in, there's a sushi counter, right? And the sushi counter, sometimes it's full and sometimes it's not full, right? Now, it turns out that people believe that if the sushi counter is empty, right, that the sushi is not fresh. Is that a logical belief? Nah. But they have it, right? So how do I deal with that belief, right? There's two approaches. One is change the belief, right? To me, that's a harder approach, right? Because a lot of people don't know where the belief came from. So someone will go in and say, well, look, by the way, just because there's one box of sushi doesn't mean it's stale sushi. You'll get pushback, right? What else can you do? What you can do is change the perception that the counter is empty. Okay? So if you think about a way in which you reduce the size of the counter, you put mirrors, now it suddenly doesn't look as empty as before, right? So the short answer to your question is, every time there's a belief that you are working against, you can change the belief. In my opinion, that's kind of hard to do. It takes time. Or you can change the perception of it. Does that kind of help you? Right? So I don't know how to actually answer that question for that specific thing you're thinking about, right? But that's what it is. Change the perception. Not the belief. Yeah?
With the Judas innovation, and when we use the washing machine to make the messy, people actually buy it because culturally the washing machine is for clothes and not for food. So how do you get past that cultural barrier that people buy it?
Well, there is no cultural barrier because nobody uses washing machines in India. Right? You know what my washing machine was growing up? This lady who used to come to my house with like a baseball bat. She would beat the hell out of clothes, hang them up, and that was it. The sun dried them. The sun was my dryer. The lady was my washing machine. That's the way we work. So this is a new idea, right? And so think of it, right? I don't know if you've seen this movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy. When an airplane kind of first lands in Africa, nobody knows what this thing is, right? So they think, well, it's a house, right? It's the same story with the washing machine, really. It showed up. The guy says, well, why would I need a machine to wash my clothes? Right? But it does go round and round. It churns things well. Lassi. Right? So in that case, there was no barrier. Right? But that is also an example of what I'm going to call an innovation that is not bottom-up. Right? It's a top-down innovation. Some companies said, you know what? India is a big market. Gee, wouldn't it be nice to sell washing machines there? Without thinking through the fact that there is an easier substitute, culturally more engaging. So not an issue for that case. Yeah.
So in the readings that we got for the conference, I would scroll down to the comments, and while there was a lot of positive responses to measuring, saying, "Oh, this is really cool," there was also kind of evenly split with negative perceptions. People saying, "Oh, this feels kind of insidious. People are kind of invading our personal behavior." And my question is that as measuring becomes a bigger part of public policy, and people are consciously integrating the two together, do you think that those negative, how relevant do you think those negative perceptions will become? And if they become really relevant, how do we rectify them?
So let's think about the following, right? So let's imagine that you know the following piece of information, right? When somebody goes to a cafeteria and you display fruits and vegetables right there, and the food that's not so healthy is a little bit at the back, right? And you know that if that happens, people consume more fruits and veggies. So suppose you know this. What would you do with that information? Right? There's two things you could do, right? One thing you could say, well, look, I have this information. I know I want people to eat more fruits and veggies, but you know what? I don't want to manipulate them. Right? Or you could use the information, right? And you could tell people that you're using the information. Okay? So think about a way in which you have information that allows you to help people make better choices. Right? How do I deal with that? What I do is I actually use the information in redesigning the context, but I tell you that I have used the information. Right? And so to the extent that you use choice architecture and nudging, along with the right disclosure, to me that's not a non-issue. Right? That's one. Two, comment number two, is whether you know it or not, you are being nudged by everybody, every single moment of the time. Right? The arrangement of this room changes the way in which this discussion happens. Do we know that? Yes, we know that. Right? But you have to have a room. You have to have seating. All right? And so if you're going to have a default anyways, why not think about what the right default should be to optimize welfare is the general approach, right? So the short answer to your question is there are always critics, and there are always going to be people who will say, well, that's manipulative. But I think it's better to be manipulated to get people to eat fruits and veggies than to have them manipulated to buy things that they don't really need and take loans that they will never be able to repay. And so from my standpoint, it doesn't make a difference. But I think the bigger thing is people are now realizing that nudging provides very simple solutions, very cost-effective solutions. Right? So the same more tomorrow stuff I talked about, it doesn't cost me anything to get people to say more tomorrow. Right? And if you think about the amount of money I need to spend to convince people they should say more today, it's a heck of a lot. It's not worth it. Right? So nudging solutions are always very cheap. The sooner people realize that, the more likely they will be to keep it on. Right? I don't know if you know, by the way, the federal government is actually looking to set up an active nudging unit in the federal government. Right? The United Kingdom government already has one in the UK. It's called a nudge unit. The federal government will have one soon. The provincial government will have one soon. Right? But it's all empirically based, transparently. Other questions? Yeah.
So you talked about the fact that positive feelings need to have an impact of 2.5 times greater than negative feelings. How do you measure something as qualitative as perception?
Yeah, so a lot of those studies that were done in the context of monetary gains and losses, and so that's why the 2.5%, right? But you're right, it's kind of hard. But the bottom line is your gain needs to be supremely blockbuster, compared to your loss, right? But if it's a monetary trade-off, you can actually make that reasonable. This is the other thing with economists. They deal with something called utility. Nobody's seen the damn thing, right? But yet they assume that we all calculate it. Okay,